So welcome today to our Create Your Personalised Wellbeing Plan for 2024 virtual boardroom that is being facilitated by HR Recruits and Marion Hewitt from Protea Solutions. My name's Jo Thompson and I'm a consultant for HR Recruit. I'm joined today by Marion, who will introduce herself shortly. Marion is going to explain the concept of positive resilience and how developing this means we are not able to cope with challenges, but also developing our ability to persevere, adapt and grow. If you do have any burning questions during the session, then please put them into the comments box and we can cover them as we go along or even shout them out. I'm now going to hand you over to Marion, who will introduce herself and start the event. Thank you.
Thank you. Thanks, Jo. It's nice to be back. It's a little while since I've done one of these sessions on my own, having done a lot with Jo over the years. So the topic I'm looking at today is positive resilience. And I recognise a few of the names coming up, and some of you will know I spent a lot of years in HR and then had more of an interest in well-being and mental health in recent years, and particularly that whole area of positive psychology, that science of making life better and how we can apply that to so many of the areas we're working on in HR, and not just things that we talk about as specifically well-being. So this session is based on a particular model that I'll tell you about in a few moments. But before we move on to that, there is I've just put a single page template that you can use that just to note down actions in the different areas if you wanted to do that, if you just scan that code. And if the technology works, I'll be very proud of myself. And if it does, then you should be able to download the sheet. If not, I can give it to you afterwards. So just keep that. But just one thing I want to just check in with you is that this is a general session about self-care and well-being. It's not a clinical intervention. I'm not coming through from a diagnostic or a therapeutic place. So if you are experiencing any symptoms, significant symptoms around physical and mental health, please ensure that you are seeking appropriate support. I can't very easily monitor the chat as we go through, so please feel free to ask questions as we do go through, and or Jo, feel free to interrupt me if you see things in the chat that I miss. Right, so what I would like us to think about is that concept of resilience, and then also positive resilience. What do we mean by that? What's the difference? And the elements of it, the pillars of positive resilience. And I would like you to be able to feel that you're leaving with a practical plan, things that you can actually do differently. I want you to feel that you've invested this time well, so that you've got some actions that you can specifically take as an outcome. All of the things that I work with come from an evidence base. To me, that's important. There's so much information out there about well-being. There's data and stats and all sorts, but actually making sure that we're really drawing on proper academic research in terms of things that we cover. So let's start off by thinking, where are we now? How would you describe your general energy level? And obviously this is a very subjective measure. I haven't talked about evidence. This is just thinking about how would you describe your general energy level. If we're thinking about that battery analogy, do you feel yourself, it's pretty low, your battery is pretty drained, or generally are you chugging along at a medium level? Or I suspect the fact you're here would suggest you don't feel that it's fully charged and you're raring to go all the time. But, we have got somebody going green. Brilliant. So let us share some of the things that you do. And whilst energy is not the same as resilience, I think that sort of the general energy and approach that we have to life is possibly an indicator or linked to the level of resilience that we have. If we have the strategies and the ability to deal with things that are happening in life, it will not sap so much of our energy. So I think where I was thinking of with this is, if we have low levels of resilience, actually dealing with life is depleting our battery at a much higher level. So I've got a bit of a mix coming through. So yeah, somebody saying very low, definitely yellow, a few other yellows. So mid-range, which I think it probably is indicative of most of us. Some days Something will happen, curveball can drain us, we'll be worrying about things, or we might have a bad night's sleep and we just wake up with low resources for the day. Other times we'll get positive feedback or something, we have a good night's sleep, we enjoy spending time with friends, and we feel it's got a bit more of a charge. So we are going to be going up and down on that. So what do I mean? Why am I talking about positive resilience? Now, in recent years, the term resilience has been used a lot. And if I'm honest, it's not a word that I ever really particularly liked, because it was often used in a way that would kind of suggest that if we are resilient, if you sort your resilience out, if you take ownership of that, actually you can cope with whatever life throws at you. And it's not that straightforward. And I mean, that's a pretty simplistic way, but often I felt that was how it was being portrayed. But where we think about positive resilience, it has that additional moving forward factor. It's about, if resilience as itself is about how we cope and recover from challenges, then the positive resilience is about how we don't just cope and recover, but we grow and develop as an outcome of it. It's the difference between coping and surviving and coping and thriving. And what's important to realise and to remember is that actually it's not a fixed trait. Now, all the things we're talking about are things that can go up and down over time. And we do have an input. We're not hardwired in a particular way. We have a lot of scope to develop things, you know, who we are. We can change elements of it. Some areas are easier than others. We know that, you know, lots of things are there ready to ambush us, those limiting beliefs, the inner critic, imposter syndrome, all those sorts of things. But we can develop strategies that can help address that. So what are the advantages of it? What's the advantage of having greater or positive resilience? We'll just feel equipped to cope with the pace of life. For most people, we're living in a pretty rapid pace of life, lots of changes to deal with. We'll just feel more equipped to cope. And we'll have that confidence to deal with challenges. Perhaps there's a level of the pressure is a stimulant for growth and performance. Obviously, there's levels, but actually pressure in itself is helpful. We can maintain optimism and a positive perspective during change that fuels us to adapt to it and move forward. It also includes that level of self-awareness that's helpful, because we can then learn from things that happen. We can learn from experience to continually grow, develop and thrive. We'll be able to get back on track quicker. If we can regroup, reflect, draw on strategies that we've got, we'll be able to get back on track and think clearly. And well as just feeling, you know, having more charge in that battery nearer that green end than the amber and the red. So the model I'm using here is one developed by PeopleWise, and you can have your actual profile done, but I'm just going to go through the 7 pillars of it to consider the things that we want to work on. And I'll go through each of them in turn, and you, as I talk about it, you can think, in my world, you know, am I quite strong in this area, or is this an area that I would benefit from putting a bit more time and attention? And we definitely can't think of the pillars in isolation. You know, they intersect, they interrelate, and actually developing one will influence another, and you'll see that increasingly as you go through it. And when we're looking at that, recognizing we're all dealing with a unique set of stresses and challenges from multiple areas of life. And at different points in time, we might need greater strategies, more skills and ways to manage in one pillar than we might in another. But actually, collectively, we want to be trying to build our capacity in all of those areas. And this quote is attributed to quite a few people, but I think more generally it comes to Henry Ford. And if you always do what you've always done, you'll always get what you've always got. And the vast majority of the things that we do, thoughts that we have are the same. They're repetitive. You might have heard me share the stats before, and I've no idea how it was ever measured, but allegedly we have around 60,000 thoughts a day. 95% of which are the same as we have the day before. We have to, just because of the volume of stuff that comes at us, we have to, most of the time, do things unconsciously. We have a trigger, we respond. But actually, if we want to make changes, we have to challenge that response. And that idea of sort of that catching that space between when something triggers us to respond in a certain way, we catch that space so we can choose different options. So think about what you're going to do differently. If we want something to be different, we actually have to change something. Just thinking about it and intending to it won't make a difference. And there are lots of things that will be unintentionally ambushing us. I mentioned that inner critic, that self-judgment, the imposter syndrome. They're all things that can be getting in the way of some of the changes we might want to make. And before you start talking to yourself again in a negative voice and telling yourself off for having that inner critic, remember that for most of the time, or all of that time, at some level, those thoughts, those behaviours are there to protect us. They're there to keep us safe. So that's what their actual intention is. But sometimes we need to move out of that safe to be able to move to that grow and thrive. As I go through the areas, I'd like you to think about where you are now. Again, totally subjective, but if you're going to give yourself a score between 1 and 10, when I mention a pillar and describe it, where would you think, where would you position yourself? And then how might you increase the strength in that area? And I'll include a few suggestions for each one. And I would encourage you to write one specific thing you will do for each one. Don't write a long list of general intentions, just one small specific change that you can then try and action, or you will action. I always tell people, I don't want to hear the word try, but you will action, and then you can measure afterwards. You can then reflect, because a lot of this is about the reflection we have. If we are not reflecting, we can then don't increase our self-awareness and move on. So the first pillar I would like us to think about is perspective. And it's important that we, for a positive outlook, that we can look at situations and consider the bigger perspective, bigger picture. It's having that glass half full view of the world rather than believing we have little control over life. It's not about having irrepressible optimism and believing everything in life is perfect and will always be wonderful, because that can actually lead to bad decisions. It's about looking at the bigger picture and staying positive when we are faced with challenges, believing that we will find a way through. Sometimes if we lose perspective, something can just feel huge in the moment. You know, we make a mistake at work, we get so wrapped up in it, we start catastrophizing it, ruminating on it, rather than actually standing back and reflecting on what actually has happened. So through standing back, we can consider a range of outcomes. It enables us to identify challenges and plan to overcome them, rather than believing there's little we can do to change them or control them, that we can influence things. So optimism is very much part of this, and optimism is something that is very definitely something that we can develop. It's not something ingrained in us. So it's been found having a more optimistic outlook has been linked to better physical health, sense of being more energetic, task focused, higher general levels of happiness or subjective well-being, whatever language you want to use. People tend to have stronger social networks and have effective coping strategies. So if we want to work out where you think your sense of perspective about things in general, however you are interpreting that, is, and then think about what specific changes you might make, what might move you up from the score you've given yourself now to the next one. So ideas might include recognizing there are multiple ways to consider a situation. What other viewpoints might there be? What might you tell somebody else about this perspective or this situation? How will you feel about something in a week's time, in a year's time? You know, so often when we're wrapped up in something, it's just this huge thing right in front of us. And then this time next year, you probably won't even remember it. So how can we get that sense of the perspective in the moment? When you're thinking about something, consider what language that includes yes and ways of reflecting rather than yes but ways of reflecting. Think about how you're framing and positioning the language when you have your inner narrative. Notice thinking patterns and unhelpful beliefs. You know, do you have a tendency to catastrophize things? Do you go from zero to total disaster in less than a blink of an eye? Are there thoughts like always and never that you catch going on in your mind? And then you find yourself seeking out confirmation bias. So challenge these thoughts. You know, when didn't that happen? What are opportunities? What things did come out of that situation? How you reframe them to get that more positive perspective. So practice that more optimistic style. Don't view difficulties as something out of your control. You know, it always happens to me type thinking. But what would you do? What perspective might you take if you could view it as an opportunity? So make a note of one thing that you might do to increase your level of perspective, your sense of perspective as a pillar. I like this quote. I use it quite a lot when I was training around coaching and goal setting. So one day Alice came to a fork in the road and saw a Cheshire cat in a tree. Which road do I take? She asked. Where do you want to go? Was his response. I don't know, Alice answered. Then said the cat, it doesn't matter. It's from Alice in Wonderland, as you would probably have realised. And it really describes that sense of lack of purpose. If we don't know where we're going, we can't work out a route to follow. So being clear on purpose is about being clear on what we want to achieve. It gives us a sense of direction and a framework for setting and achieving goals, the aspirations that motivate our activities. So in Japanese culture, finding meaning and purpose in life is called finding your ikigai, the point where the different elements of what we love, what we're good at, what the world needs, and what we get paid for all converge. So they all align together. Purpose is also an element of many other wellbeing models that have come across. The PERMA model from Seligman, psychological factors of wellbeing. So we know having that sense of purpose, and it doesn't have to be any major, huge, world-changing goals that we're aiming for. It's about having that sense of purpose and then the drive and commitment to achieve them. And if we make sure we've set goals that are aligned to things that are important to us, to our values, we're much more likely to work towards them. And if we're lacking in purpose, we're just demotivated. And if we think of that in a work situation, if we can't see the point of what we're doing, we are not going to get engaged and energized in it. Certainly I think that's relevant for wider engagement theory, and we know for motivating employees, there has to be a sense of purpose. There has to be a line that's linking what I'm doing in this moment to something that actually has meaning and matter to me. So think about what your sense of purpose is in different areas of life. We'll have different things that affect us. And what might we do? Some people do have a clear sense of purpose, almost a mission in life that drives their actions. Maybe it's based on a particular interest or linked to something that happens to them. But for many of us, perhaps we have to take a bit more time to reflect and think about it, to gain clarity of what our purpose is. So to help you do that, identify the values that are of fundamental importance to you, those core values. I'm quite sure you'll have done things in the past that have been about your values, because actually our purpose needs to be congruent with those. We won't, if we think we've got a purpose, but it jars with a value, it won't happen. We won't be able to be engaged to do it. Identify the things that you do willingly and with enthusiasm, and think about the outcome of those activities, because it's likely there is some purpose within those that mean you want to take part. So seek out more opportunities to achieve these outcomes. And remember, we're not necessarily talking about major goals. It could just be the purpose of just, enjoyment, switching off. There is a purpose in the activity. So set meaningful goals in different areas of life and ensure that they are important to you and not the things that you think you should or could do. That's your jobs list. That's not about a purpose. So identify one or two things, or just one thing that you could particularly do. Maybe it's revisit your values. So you've got a clarity on that. The next pillar to think about is control. So control is about how we can manage our emotions, how we can stay calm in times of stress, managing them effectively, recovering quickly when things go wrong. And again, as with other pillars, it's not a fixed capability, but one we can develop. We can develop that ability to control our emotions rather than them controlling us at some level. There is that thing that, we think we're rational thinking humans. We're not. We are feeling humans that then think. The emotions will always override, but we can put in strategies to help us have greater control over them. So it isn't about denying or burying feelings. It's about how we can stay focused under pressure, because we draw on a wider awareness. So it links back to perspective. So we can draw in that rational and logical thinking to then respond in a helpful way. Our instinctive response will always be emotions first, but then we bring in that rational perspective and make changes or consider options from that. So people with a low level of control, low level of resilience in this area are likely to adopt unhelpful coping strategies and less likely to seek help. So we do know that being able to have a better control over the emotions in a positive way leads to performing more effectively and being better able to deal with stress. So what can we do? How can we build a stronger control pillar? Have go-to strategies to draw on as soon as you notice an emotional response to something. Keep it simple. Just stop. Take a few slow, deep breaths. That then re-engages the rational brain, which goes offline when we are doing that emotional response. Start to build an awareness of specific triggers that elicit a strong emotional response. And it might be something really small, like somebody that you have to meet regularly is always late, and timekeeping is something that's important to you, and you just feel yourself getting immediately frustrated. It's not a big deal. So again, links to perspective. So notice the things that do trigger a reaction and identify strategies to manage those. Consider that broader perspective. How will this feel in a month's time? Reflect on why you might be having such a strong response to something. Often it's linked to going against something that is important to us, the values that are important to us. Or conduct an audit of life, your world, identify areas of stress and potential stress, and review your strategies to manage them. And these strategies will often link with other pillars, including the wellbeing one that we'll talk about in a moment. So, where can you take greater control than you might have been doing? So note something for that one. Connectedness. Every model of wellbeing you encounter has the importance of connection articulated in some way. We need to have meaningful, authentic connections, relationships with people in our world. It's about having that sense of belonging and being accepted, being able to give and receive support. It's not about whether you're an introvert or an extrovert, whether you actively enjoy socializing or others. And it's not about social media connections. It's about, the phrase I often use is having those people in our corner, the people that we can just be with, just be our authentic self with. And we know they value us being in their world. So how can we build and work actively, retain, maintain, treasure, nurture those relationships in multiple areas of life? So whether it's in our family, in our friendship, in our work, in our community. So we have that sense of belonging. So if you remember the Brené Brown phrase you may have come across, is the difference between fitting in and belonging. So fitting in is about assessing a situation and becoming who you need to be accepted. Belonging, on the other hand, doesn't require us to change who we are. It requires us to be who we are. So it's about where are those connections when we are belonging rather than adapting to fit in. And if we see the impact of not having that connectedness, actually the negative impact of that loneliness, and research shows that 7% of people in Great Britain experience chronic loneliness, with 49% say they felt lonely some of the time or occasionally. Bear in mind, this isn't the same as isolation. You can feel lonely in a crowd. It's about having that sense of connection. So how can you strengthen those connections, build that connectedness pillar? Start by identifying the source of support in different areas of your life. Who would you turn to if things got difficult? And who would you hope would want to turn to you? Actually really think about it in the different areas of your life, and check that you've got support in all areas of your life. Are there any gaps? Where would you benefit from a greater sense of connectedness? Proactively develop, nurture, and build those connections. Are you spending time with the people that do enable you to feel yourself? Are you spending those time with those people where you do belong, as opposed to adapting and feel that you need to fit in, because that will have multiple impacts on psychological well-being. So what actions are you going to take to identify and nurture the connections in your world? You know, having just had the Christmas and New Year break, often there's this mad flurry to catch up with people over the Christmas period that we don't see for the rest of the year. Well, why aren't we maintaining? Okay, perhaps we don't want to maintain that level of socializing, but how can we make sure we do maintain connections as we go through? So think about actions you might take for connectedness. Sixth pillar is about growth. And I'm fairly confident you will have heard of the concept of a fixed mindset and a growth mindset. And we know from extensive research that there are multiple benefits from that growth mindset. If we have a fixed mindset, we believe our intelligence is at a set level. We'll avoid challenges, give up easily when we encounter problems, and see putting in any effort as pointless. And through that, people miss out on so much. If we have a growth mindset, we recognise that intelligence can be developed, which creates a desire to learn more. We are likely to embrace challenges and persist when we encounter barriers. We'll learn from feedback and mistakes, but see effort as worthwhile in part of our development and growth so that we reach our potential. So we can choose to adopt a growth mindset. We might need to challenge some of those beliefs that are there, perhaps those limiting beliefs, but having that growth mindset has real power and impact. And it's kind of relevant to the whole area. If we believe that we can grow and develop, we believe that we can increase our scores in all those pillars around the positive resilience. So have a mind that's open to learning, have a curiosity to understand new things, and want to persevere when things are tough. So it's about learning in its broadest sense. We're not talking about academic learning. It's about reflecting behaviours, skills, that general self-awareness bit. It means that we can cope with change much more, because actually we'll view it as an opportunity, as times to do things differently. And learning was actually identified as one of the 5 factors of well-being in the 5 Ways to Wellbeing from the New Economics Foundation, a good few years ago now, but it was recognised as the importance of it. And the growth mindset is also linked to wider health behaviours. You know, if we've got an interest in learning more, and as we're learning so much more about the mind and the body, if we have that growth mindset, we're much more likely to take ownership for learning and understanding about healthy lifestyle habits for our overall well-being and bringing about change. So in reality, we'll all have a mix of mindsets. We can't have a growth mindset in all areas of life. We may have more limits in certain areas, but actually, how can we develop this bit a bit more? So start thinking about your plan, what you're going to put down. Start with some self-reflection. When you face something new, what do you notice about your thoughts and emotions? Do you notice an unhelpful inner narrative that's perhaps telling you you can't do it, you're not good enough? Or do you embrace it? Do you view it as an opportunity? So think more about how you might reframe that negative narrative if that's happening. Be open to feedback and constructive criticism, and view it as constructive criticism. Consider what you can learn. What can you do differently? Recognize actually it's context specific. So even if you get some feedback that you find difficult in an area of life, it's not about identifying you as a person. It's not putting a value on you as a person. What can we learn from that? You know, reflect from it. And how can that inform a different approach next time? If we've got that growth mindset, we'll reflect, we'll learn, we have the opportunity to do differently. And then embrace opportunities for learning in all areas of life. Coping. How do we get the best balance? How do we get the best balance between pressure and performance? So we need the cognitive skills to draw on demands in life. But actually, we need to make sure that we are functioning in a way that means we are feeling energized and stimulated at work. We want to have that, to actually have those elements of resilience. We need to be pushed out of our comfort zone, but we need to be confident that we can cope with the demands. You know, the comfort zone is about the comfort, it's about keeping us safe, but actually, for talking about growth as well, we need to move out of that. So remember, we can feel eustress, good stress, as well as negative stress. So it is that whole continuum. But if we haven't got good strategies in place around coping, we will end up with that red zone of the battery. So how do we get that right balance between pressure and performance? You've probably seen that, you know, the pressure performance curve. We need a level of pressure to perform, but if the pressure becomes too much, then we hit burnout and performance drops off. So what could we specifically do? What are the strategies that we might develop? So recognize that stress as itself isn't negative. It's too much of the wrong type of stress that has the negative consequences, but the right level gives us energy and focus. So identify ways that stress is benefiting you and find ways to access this. Check your inner voice. How does it speak to you in terms of how we're coping about things? Talk to yourself as someone you care about. Are you speaking to yourself in the same way as you would to somebody else? There's different thoughts on this one in terms of do the tasks you avoid and don't want to do first, get them off your list. Other schools of thought, if you start with a task that you enjoy, actually engages you and motivates you to get on with other things. So if you've got a load on, work out what works best for you. Work out which is the best strategy to cope with a lot that's happening. Is it to get over the task that you don't want to do first, or are you better off energizing yourself with something you'll enjoy first? But proactively create a list of strategies you can draw upon in situations when your coping is being pushed. And those short ones are the ones, you know, if I need 5 minutes just to give that battery a bit of a power boost, what will I do? So sometimes that's just the breathing techniques, the going outside for a short walk, those sorts of things. And then the last one, this is an area where I have done lots of sessions just on its own, because this covers the multiple aspects of our well-being, because actually we need that physical well-being in place as well, and how we get the balance of the different areas of our life right. So our overall health is our outcome of our physical, mental, and our social well-being. Actual definitions vary a bit, but I like to think that if we've got well-being, we have the balance between the challenges we're facing and the resources we have available. Our well-being is a kind of continuum. Again, you can take it back to that battery analogy, if you like. If we have low levels of well-being, we're likely to feel tired, lack energy, be disengaged. And when we are feeling depleted, actually, then it is harder to adopt healthy habits. Now, I've talked to people about, a healthy diet. If we plan our meals and we shop well, it's easier to make healthy meal choices and set ourselves up well. If we dash into a shop on the way home from work when we're tired and hungry, it's going to be far easier to make an unhealthy choice. So think about that. The work-life balance comes into this bit as well, but when we think about work-life balance, be realistic about it. It's not this perfect nirvana where everything fits together neatly in our life and we've in this Zen zone. It's about how do you get those different, how does the work and life interact together? And we don't necessarily, there's sort of an assumption within the discussion that we want to be having more of life and less of work. But actually, if we enjoy our work, if we're engaged, if it's got purpose for us, then a balance for one person will be different than somebody else. So work out what's right for you and have clear strategies to cope with things that are causing pressure and changes that are happening. Think about the very basics for well-being. Don't forget the sleep, diet, exercise, the foundation blocks for well-being. Think about that. So what about the things that you will do for that? So this is a whole area of itself, but start with reflection again. What do you know you enjoy doing that helps your well-being, and how can you make sure you carry on doing that? Think about your daily, your weekly routine. How can you build in the building blocks for your well-being? Do you prioritize your sleep? Do you exercise regularly? When do you rest and relax? Some of you might be sitting there thinking, does she know my life? And I don't. But actually thinking about how can you build in small element, looking after yourself doesn't have to be time consuming. It doesn't have to be extravagant or selfish. Sometimes it's about saying no to people, putting some boundaries in place, not looking at your emails in the evening. So think about what it actually means. Are there any persistent stressors you've got that you actually need to take a new look at because they're just continually there and you're not managing them in the best way? So what new approaches might you do? And if you want more ideas on that, I will send you the details afterwards. I do run some separate self-care power hour sessions. Some of you may have done them. And I've got some free ones going at the moment, but that's where we really drill down more into this. So think of a couple of things that you might do. When you've made notes of things, if you didn't download the summary sheet, the QR code's there again. Make sure it's specific and realistic. So when I say specific, what exactly are you going to do, how and when? So you can tick it off your list afterwards. And that may include something like self-reflection. Plan in self-reflection time. Is it realistic? Think about your world. Think about the demands on you and make sure the things that you are putting into your plan are things that are setting you up for success, not the other way. So really make sure you are making notes of things. As I mentioned, these 7 pillars are part of this positive resilience profile. And if you are interested in getting your own profile, which you fill in a questionnaire, gives you a score in each of those areas, and then tailored suggestions to increase each one. So it is an evidence-based one, and I can thank you. Thanks for putting that in the chat. So it's an evidence-based one. If you're interested, I can send you more details. So just to summarise, that's me. In terms of what I do, the wider work that I do. Unleashing You is my main programme, which is about, hits all the top people priorities at the moment: personal, organisational, performance, engagement and wellbeing programme, available as a full programme or in modules, approved by the Institute of Leadership. I do the mental health first aid training, as well as a range of training around positive resilience and coaching, self-care and coaching. So I hope that has given you lots of ideas, which is the intention, food for thought, and that you can put at least a couple of things into action. So thank you very much, Jo. Shall I pass back to you? I'm just seeing if there's any.
Marion, the only one was Megan wasn't able to download the link from the QR code that you had originally.
Right.
So just
did anybody else manage to do it? Was it working?
Just wondered if you've got a link that I can then send.
Yeah, I'll do it. Yeah, I'll send it to you afterwards.
Okay, thank you.
Any other questions? You did it. Oh, good. Thank you. Glad it worked. So any other questions? Okay. The other thing is, anybody want to put any of the actions they are going to take into the chat, because that will build in accountability. So if anybody wants to write down anything that they are going to do differently as a result of listening to that, feel free to put those into the chat.
So I'd just like to say thanks very much to everyone that's attended today, and to Marion for facilitating the event. I will send out some correspondence to everyone that's signed up for the event, and I'll put a post on LinkedIn. So if you'd like a copy of the recording, then please put a comment against the LinkedIn post. I'm running another event this Thursday at 12:30 called Aim High, and it's a live coaching experience for leaders who want to transform their leadership and results. Details about how to sign up for the event will be included in the email. If anyone is recruiting, then we also have accountancy recruit, FD recruit, and exec recruit within the group. But finally, I'd just like to say a massive thank you to Marion for your time and effort in putting the event together, and also everybody for joining. I hope you've got a lot out of it. So thanks very much.